The shoulder is the most commonly injured joint in functional fitness, far and away higher than the low back or the knee. Why is that? Today, we're going to unpack what a resilient shoulder can do, the motions, the forces it can tolerate. We're also going to talk about how to modify those movements with your fitness athletes, whether we're starting very basic, maybe somebody new to being a fitness athlete who wants to develop skills, who wants to maybe stay ahead of injury and improve performance, or that person who is already doing this, who's maybe already encountering these injuries and is tired of being stuck in maybe that cycle of trying a movement, encountering some volume, having an injury, taking a break, and then going through that doom loop over and over again. So when we talk about the shoulder, especially in the context of the fitness athlete, what does a resilient shoulder really mean? A resilient shoulder can do three things. It can withstand rotational shear force. So, commonly in functional movements, that is a combination of internal rotation and extension. And we see overhead, moving overhead, flexion and external rotation. And more importantly, in the context of the fitness athlete, the transition between those two different movement patterns and that shear force that it adds to the shoulder labrum and the demands it places on our rotator cuff and shoulder. Resilient shoulders can also handle compressive forces. So thinking about a heavy shoulder to overhead, a heavy push press, a heavy push jerk, a split jerk, or maybe something inverted like a handstand push up or handstand walking. So that compression feeling down on the shoulder over and over again. And then the opposite, a decompressive, or what we might call a stability force in the shoulder, where we're now pulling the humerus away from the labrum and we're asking the muscles of the rotator cuff and the shoulder girdle to stabilize that shoulder joint, to keep the head of that humerus congruent with the labrum. We see that commonly with wide grip movements like overhead squats, snatches, and so on. And we also see it happen with hanging movements up on the pull-up bar. And so we also see the combination of all those things together in really high level movement. Take, for example, a kipping bar muscle up, a massive flexion, external rotation, shear force to internal rotation, extension force. We're going to pass through internal rotation, extension, compress the shoulder in the dip, and then we're going to decompress when we come back through the bar and generate a lot of momentum through that kip swing. A resilient shoulder can handle all of those things. So today we're going to show you how to progress somebody from maybe very low level, very irritable, all the way up back to that full functional movement. So the most commonly ignored movement pattern when we're rehabbing these athletes is working on internal rotation and extension together. Physical therapists in general, personal trainers, coaches, whatever, are very comfortable recommending and doing a good job of prescribing exercises for folks that's going to help with flexion and external rotation, right? That lift of the shoulder up and overhead. Whether that's early on, lifting change plates in prone, landmine press, whatever. As a profession, we're pretty dialed there. We're much less dialed with internal rotation and extension. Yet we see this demand quite often in CrossFit and other functional fitness programs. It is that high pull motion in our Olympic weightlifting, that transition in a snatch or a clean. It is passing through a dip and a muscle up. It is the bottom position of a bench press, a push up, a burpee, a lot of horizontal pressing movements. Very often we treat this in seated, right, with some bands with the arm at neutral, which does not represent where we find that shoulder position, let's say in a high pull of a snatch with a very wide grip, standing compression against gravity, trying to lift up and away versus seated arm at our side. Likewise, very common using bands and doing maybe something like a seated row to work on shoulder extension. Again, that could be a great place to start somebody, but combining those motions together, doing them against resistance, doing them against gravity, and making them resemble functional movement more and more and more in that plan of care is going to benefit your patient a lot better. So with internal rotation and extension, we're going to talk about doing supine work with a band for maybe somebody who's very new, just starting to build capacity, or maybe somebody who has a very high irritability presentation that can't do some of the higher level stuff we would love for them to start off with. So what I like to start these folks with is a very simple light band. These are Rogue Monster bands. What we like about Rogue is they publish their tension on their website. So this is the orange band, their easiest band. Now, what we would love is to start somebody in a standing high pull pattern, but unfortunately, that can maybe be too challenging or that can maybe be too irritating if that person is really flared up. So I like to start these folks in supine. The key here is you see me lay down on this treatment table is I'm going to keep my right arm off the table so that I can high pull, internally rotate, and extend off the table versus if my arm is supported, I'm not really going to get full extension and I'm not really going to get full internal rotation. If anything, I might go the opposite way and I might start to go into flexion, external rotation, which is not what we want. So in supine, take gravity away from the equation, wrap that band around the foot, and then again, arm unsupported out to the side, and we're just doing a high pull here, right? Being cautious that we're getting full extension, excursion of the shoulder and internal rotation. And even with a light band, you're going to start to get a lot of pump there. And so that can be a great place to start people, give them a light TheraBand to go home with, something like that. Once that is relatively comfortable, once folks have moved beyond that challenge-wise, we can move to the next progression, which would be to get a dumbbell or a kettlebell and do something like a single arm high pull. Now, key here, same motion, right? Internal rotation, extension combined together. What we don't want, though, is a little dip in the knee, right? A little dip and drive. Our CrossFitters, our fitness athletes are going to be used to generating momentum that way. We don't want our legs to help our shoulder. We want to isolate this pattern in our shoulder. So lock those knees and be really judicious here that we're getting a lot of time under tension with that dumbbell. We can increase the load as a progression. I love to make a lightweight heavy with a lot of tempo. 3 seconds up, a 3-second pause at that end range, which is going to be challenging for a lot of folks. We don't spend a lot of time just hanging out in that end range. We transition through it with a snatch. We transition through it with a muscle up, something like that. But hanging out at end range 3 seconds and then 3 seconds all the way back down. If you give a challenging enough weight, 5 sets to 5 reps at that tempo, you will gas somebody's shoulder out in a very productive manner. And then our end stage with these folks, we want to get these folks back to full internal rotation extension like we might see at the bottom of a bench press, at the bottom of a bar muscle up or a ring muscle up or a ring dip. So we want to get folks on the rings. Rogue sells these awesome rings, which just come on and off your pull-up bar. They're super easy to have in the clinic. And so early on, we want to see, can somebody do a top hold on the rings? So can they jump up on the rings and can they hold an isometric hold at the top of those rings? I would love to see somebody be able to handle a reverse Tabata, 8 rounds, 10 seconds of work, 20 seconds of rest. And then I would want to flip that. Maybe they're unable to flip to a full Tabata, 8 rounds, 20 seconds work, 10 seconds rest, but maybe we can do 10 sets of 10 seconds, right? Progress beyond that reverse Tabata and then transition to that full Tabata. And then what I ultimately want to see is somebody hold a bottom hold. So in that internal rotation, extension, and compression position, can they hang out in the bottom hold of a ring dip? And how does that feel? Is it shaky? Is it weak? Is it painful? Same progression there. Can we go from a reverse Tabata to maybe 10 sets of 10 seconds? And then can we go to a full Tabata? What's great about that is early on, that is rehab for somebody. And then after rehab, that just becomes accessory work. That becomes something that's going to continue to make somebody's muscle up stronger, their bench press stronger, as they continue to do other things like bench press, muscle ups, strict ring dips in their normal programming, but do things like ring holds as part of their accessory work. So that's internal rotation and extension. The next is compression, of lifting weight overhead and having that compressive force, pushing that humerus into the shoulder as we try to use the deltoid and rotator cuff to lift weight overhead. Now, again, where I like to start people, pretty low level, irritability, weakness, whatever, is something like a kettlebell screwdriver, laying on the side, affected side up, and then just moving fully between internal rotation and external rotation, right? Challenging the capacity to withstand compression and shear force at the same time. When those become easy, we can make the same weight harder with a bottoms up screwdriver, right? We don't need to get too much more fancy to increase the challenge at the same weight. Again, here I'm looking for something like a full Tabata or maybe 5 sets of 45 seconds. then progressing that person to a bottoms up hold in the front rack position, usually going to be tolerated pretty well by somebody with shoulder pain. Same dosage here. Then I want to see, can we do bottoms up fully overhead? Do we have the range of motion? Do we have the ability to withstand that compressive force? Same dosage here. And then you can get fancy with it, right? I love to do complexes of bottoms up strict press into a bottoms up overhead carry to advance that person. At that point, that person is probably ready to move back into the gym with things like landmine presses, beginning to try out things like strict press, push jerk, and then back to split jerk as the full progression. Along the way, working in handstand progressions, if that person doesn't have that capacity or that person has not done it in a while, things like handstand push-up negatives, things like shoulder taps, getting that person back to kipping in strict handstand push-ups. Our final progression here is going to be decompressive, or what we might call a stabilizing force. Before we finish up, I just want to take a moment to introduce myself. My name is Alan. I'm happy to be your host today. It is Fitness Athlete Friday, the best darn day of the week. We talk all things CrossFit, functional fitness, powerlifting, Olympic weightlifting. We talk endurance, athletics. So if you have a person that is recreationally active, or it's you yourself, then everything you need to know about that population lives here on Fitness Athlete Friday. Courses from us coming up. We have one live course left in the year. It will be next weekend, December 7th and 8th. That'll be with Mitch Babcock down in St. Petersburg, Florida. And then we have live courses beginning in 2025. Online courses. Our level 1 online course begins January 20th, and then our level 2 online course begins January 26th. And we just announced today, all courses priced at $695 are going to increase to $750 on January 1st. So if you see a course you like, you can buy it right now and lock in the current price. And even if there's not a course you see that you can attend that fits your schedule, fits your geography, whatever, we have a new option this year to buy a course credit, and you have a coupon code to use through the end of 2025 if a course pops up that works for you at the beginning of the year or maybe later in the year in 2025. Okay, let's finish and talk about decompressive force or stabilizing force. So with that arm outside of the shoulder, force is trying to pull the humeral head away from the labrum, and we need to stabilize. We need to create that compressive force that we're now lacking. In our Fitness Athlete Level 1 online course, when we get to talking about vertical pressing and vertical pulling, we introduce the bamboo bar, and we talk about all the research supporting bamboo instability bar work. You can do it with a PVC pipe. So join us in our Level 1 online class if you want to see all of that research and all of those progressions. But I like to start people here early on because it's generally pretty well tolerated. So with the bamboo bar, we can do a bunch of stuff. I'm just looking to find something that the patient can tolerate that's challenging. So that might be the top hold of a bench press, or an overhead press, or a snatch grip press, and we're just holding. Or maybe we're marching, or maybe we're actively marching, we're working in turns, whatever that person can tolerate that's going to challenge them. And then getting into more complex work, active bamboo bar bench press, active behind the neck strict press or front rack strict press, active overhead squats with the bamboo bar, really challenging the stability demands of that shoulder. And then I think what's neglected a lot in rehab is that we most often encounter these forces, yes, in a wide grip, an overhead squat, a snatch, but we encountered a lot on the pull-up bar with hanging. And we don't get people hanging early enough. And we often find we release these people too early because hanging gymnastics, just even the hanging itself, again, that decompressive, that stabilizing force is just too much for those people. We can be creative with our grip and get these people back on the pull-up bar sooner than we may think, which is great because it's going to help them maintain their grip strength. And it's probably also going to be quite relieving to be hanging and actively using those muscles, even if we're not quite generating momentum yet with kipping. And so the first grip is going to be a neutral grip, which is going to be where hands are facing you. Obviously, you can't grab the same side of the pull-up bar with both hands, so your hands are going to be offset. What most people find comfortable is that the injured shoulder, that hand is closer to the body because it's going to reduce the demand and create a shorter lever. It is going to be a little bit awkward. I always warn people that because your hands are offset, your body will feel weird and rotated, and that's just the name of the game. But these are typically tolerated pretty well. And so grabbing that neutral grip, and the key here is once you're up on the bar, making sure that you actually come down to a straight elbow, and you create that active hang position with that neutral grip. Dosage here, very similar. Can we get a reverse Tabata? Can we get 10 seconds, 10 sets of 10 seconds? Can we go to a full Tabata? Again, great for grip strength, great for shoulder stability. Then we want to progress those hangs. What a lot of people are probably going to like next is what we would consider a mixed grip hang, no different than deadlifting, where we switch one hand pronated, one hand supinated. The painful shoulder is probably not going to like supination, so we would keep that one pronated. We would supinate the other one, and then eventually what we want to be able to do is go back and forth each set where the injured arm is withstanding a little bit of supination. So that looks like this. Mixed grip up on the pull-up bar, pronation, supination, active hang position. And again, can we do a reverse Tabata where maybe early on we're never supinating the injured hand, the injured shoulder, but then maybe we're working every other set. And then the final goal here would be to be able to withstand what we would call a chin-up grip, supination on both shoulders, active hang position, right? Very challenging on the shoulder, especially the anterior shoulder. And then from there, can we make it look more like the gymnastics we want that person to do up on the pull-up bar? So can we now maybe add in some scapular cars, controlled articular rotation? So can we, in a very strict fashion, in our normal pull-up double pronated grip, can we go through a small box in our shoulders where we are going through protraction, elevation, retraction, depression, but under control with our shoulder doing all the work? No momentum generation. Just thinking about your shoulder moving is a weird straight box in space. Very exhausting for folks who need a lot of shoulder stability demand. Somebody that can handle that is probably ready to go back to kipping gymnastics, strict pull-ups, kipping pull-ups, muscle-ups, that sort of thing. And in combination with these other movement patterns, ready to begin to restore functional movement out in the gym after an injury, or again, to do these things as accessory work to stave off injury and improve performance. So what makes a resilient shoulder? The ability to withstand whatever forces it encounters, understanding it's the most commonly injured joint in functional fitness for a reason. We ask a lot of it. We ask for it to produce combined motions of internal rotation and extension with flexion and external rotation, and to go back and forth between those positions with a kipping gymnastics motion. We ask a lot of the shoulder for compression to lift heavy weights overhead, and we ask a lot of stability out of the shoulder when we can intentionally decompress or pull the humeral head away from the labrum. And sometimes we ask it to do all of those things at once, like in a snatch or like in a muscle up, where we are passing from internal rotation extension to flexion and external rotation. We are adding compression and we are adding decompression, maybe within the span of a couple seconds. And oh, by the way, we're doing it under cardiovascular fatigue. But if you can do all of that, we would consider you to have a very resilient shoulder, somebody who's ready for whatever shows up on the whiteboard in the gym. So I hope this was helpful. I hope you have an awesome Friday. Have a great weekend. We'll see you Monday. Bye, everybody.